Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Joe Moore here. This is Psychedelics Today Solidarity Friday, joined again by Kyle Buller and Michelle Janikian. How are you two doing?
Pretty good. Nice rainy day here. So got that rainy day vibe going on. Yep.
Lovely. Yeah, I'm good too. It's the opposite here, but I'm still enjoying it.
How's weather in Breckenridge, Joe?
Oh, it was brilliant.
Snowy?
Yeah. Yeah, we got like another 3 inches, just like a series of 3-inch storms. It's lovely. Yeah. Denver got killed with that multi-foot storm, but up here it's been light. Yeah, we haven't been getting as much as I want, but it's still extraordinary up here. Another sunny day in paradise. Yeah. So before we jump into everything, on May 20, we kick off another 8-week edition of Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. It's going to be awesome. And there's 2 rounds. We sold a few so far, but usually it starts accelerating in like a week or 2. So if you really want to join us and you don't want to miss this round, go check out psychedelic-education-center.com for more. Kyle, you and I should probably do a whole podcast just talking about the class, maybe bring in a past student, just so people understand the flow. Because it's kind of hard. Like, we don't just read through clinical abstracts and, published papers. Say, this is how psychedelic therapy works. I read these papers. It's like, well, no, we give a broad overview. And while scientific papers are helpful for informing your practice, it's not the totality of it. And we give some lived experience from our both of our lives. And we've got a lot of master classes there. So about 47 hours total, I think now. And yeah, excited. So any questions, reach out. We do scholarship stuff sometimes. So if you want to apply for that, just email us. I think the new email is support@psychedelicstoday.com. Trying to get away from the Gmail thing.
Yep.
Yeah. And if that's not of interest and you still want to support us, come over to Patreon, patreon.com/psychedelicstoday, and just leave us a small monthly donation, and anything helps. And also, free book giveaway alert. We're giving away 5 more copies of Carl Hart's book, Drug Use for Grownups. Penguin, Random House hooked it up, and they'll be mailing those out. It's going to be U.S. only, unfortunately, folks. Sorry. Someday when we're loaded, we can mail it all over the world. But it might be a year or 2 more. But come over to the show notes here for this episode of the podcast, and you can find a link to that, or check us out on our socials. I'm sure you'll see posts for it there. And Michelle, you just finished up a little bit ago listening to the Carl Hart podcast. And you said you liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was just such a great conversation, among grownups. I thought you guys just covered a lot of great points. And, Dr. Carl Hart has really gone through kind of the ringer lately as far as, going on mainstream media and kind of, getting approached by broadcasters and journalists who didn't read his book, who don't understand, who didn't try to understand, and just kind of like came from this, point of view where they have one person in their life who, this can't be true because I've seen addiction in action, and then it's just not following a logical argument. And I just really loved how Carl Hart laid it out. I really felt like I could hear he gets like a bit more comfortable just like talking about this stuff with you guys after like first like 20 minutes. He's like, who are these guys? And then it's like, oh, all right, I'm talking to other grownups. We can have a fucking grown-up conversation about drug use. And then I think it really just like hits a stride, and I really found it enjoyable as well as educational. And I just recommend everyone check it out. If you haven't read the book, if you're on the fence about this idea, I think listening to him talk was really helpful for me to like put this stuff in more perspective. So, and just like while I'm, publicly talking, thank you, Dr. Carl Hart, for writing that book and all the work you do. It's been really inspiring to me personally. And I really think like as a psychedelic community, if we're not constantly talking about the drug war and how it needs to end and how it affects people outside of our psychedelic community, I think we're doing an injustice. And just really want to thank him for encouraging me to keep on it. And this isn't over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Not by a long shot, right? Like we've got a long way to go. Yeah. So you're right. Like a lot of these media personalities, they have one person that had a drug abuse issue in their lives or a few. And they're just in and out of rehab or like, you know, on Skid Row. And it's an ugly scene. And then you generalize that to everybody because people aren't coming out of the closet, you know, like another testimony. Like I'm pretty sure I've done bath salts a couple times by not testing my MDMA, you know, thinking I was doing MDMA. I'm getting all cranked out on bath salts and not a horrible time, just not what I expected. You know, could have caused serious medical situations, but you know, yeah. And I think he said oh man, there's some line. Jumped out of my mind. But there's just so many killer quotes in that episode from Carl Hart. Like Mike, the show notes gentleman, my friend, would he said he kept taking down quotes as if he was going to put them in the show notes, but it's like everything he said was like worthy of like a meme. And it's like yeah, like I need to go back and listen to it honestly, because I think I'm going to learn a lot just reflecting on it. Yeah, I felt very well connected to him, even though he's not in this kind of psychedelic milieu. A lot of us are.
Yeah.
I don't know. Kyle, do you have any reflections a few days later after recording that thing?
Yeah, I was just chatting with somebody just about the conversation, reflecting. And I think that it's such a radical idea that he's like pushing against like, you know, just drug policy, drug war, and drug use in general, substance use in general. And, you know, something that I was thinking about, and you know, I mentioned this in the show and I mentioned it a few times on various episodes, is that, you know, where I grew up, I mean, our town got hit pretty hard by the heroin epidemic. And Michelle, I'm sure maybe you could relate. I'm not too sure how it was in your neck of the woods in Jersey, but, you know, it's got hit really hard. And I know plenty of people that have passed from it. And I've been to most of the funerals I've been to have been for people that have like overdosed on heroin. And it's really challenging. And I think like if you have somebody in your life that is suffering from addiction and struggling with that, you know, I think you see the harms of the current system, and even thinking about a new paradigm seems terrifying and scary to say, well, if we open this up and make this normal, is everybody gonna, you know, become addicted to heroin or drugs or whatnot? And it's like, well, you know, have we had the chance to have a new paradigm to operate in, right? Answer is no. And what would it look like if we were able to really change that? Would things shift for the better? I don't know. I like to think that some of these issues are somewhat societal. Like I was kind of making the comment of there's a stigma of you know, people that are marginalized, that are using substances, they're stuck in these societal traps, right? Not making enough money, working, self-medicating possibly. And, you know, so we stigmatize it even more. It becomes taboo and it becomes this negative thing, while the high class, you know, business person is using substances. You don't see those issues necessarily. Sometimes they come out and their life might fall apart later on, but it's just the difference, right? These societal differences of where people are at. And it's like, yeah, what if we really shifted things? Could we save lives and be more happier without putting more harm onto people?
Like there's this dominance of like a 12-step mindset. And in a lot of the comments in social media, I'm seeing like a lot of people immediately triggered, like heroin, worst thing in the world, but it's prescribable still. It's very different, well, very similar to other prescribable meds. So like, is it the devil just offhand? And I had a thought earlier today. So like early in the drug war, you know, cocaine and cannabis were associated with undesirables, you know, by society types, right? And then similarly with opium in opium dens, Chinese train, you know, workers, you know, it was used in the same way to suppress those immigrants from like rising in a lot of ways. And there's also, you know, a lot of traditional use in my, you know, I observe that there's some traditional use of opium in India and the Middle East too. And are we kind of being racist by are we doing the same thing over again with opium in some ways? Like, I understand this whole thing's really politicized, but back to my 12-step thought. Just a lot of people aren't able, if they're in a program, to think carefully about this, unfortunately, just because this is, the 12-step thing. Some people think it's really helped them, and often it does. And these people have to like assume these dogmas from the 12-step world in order to feel safe in the world, that they're not going to fall apart again in the way that they didn't like to. And then it's like there's so many fears there, but shame is possibly one of the biggest ones because we can't have open and honest conversations about drugs. Yeah. So, some food for thought. And while we're at it, Kyle, I think I'm ready. We can talk about that Instagram post. So we made a analogy to like rock climbing. Like, I don't go rock climbing because it's safe, right? But often when I rock climb, I'll use a rope. Sometimes I don't use a rope, which makes it a lot more dangerous for sure. And there's harm reduction steps in rock climbing inherent in how I'm approaching it. Typically, like, I'm wearing clothes, I'm wearing sunscreen. Probably I brushed my teeth and I'm wearing my glasses, and I know how much wear and tear my skin can take before I'm like falling apart and can't touch anything anymore. So there's a lot there. And what did this woman say? It was something along the lines of, it was a privileged stance to make that kind of analogy because I have harm reduction steps baked in. And I guess I don't really understand this, because people who use drugs can use harm reduction or health and happiness all the time if they choose to, or have the education to do so. Not everybody has that, but whose fault is that? It's the fault of the feds and the UN and the drug war. Not my fault, not anybody's fault really, other than the institutions that design this horrifically racist drug war. As Carl Hart says, is highly successful in doing what it was designed to do.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't understand that comment. I was kind of triggered by it, honestly, but I don't really know what to do with it either.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think, like, maybe that was an analogy you made, and this is something I was reflecting on. I know I made the comment of like, these dangerous sports, should they be illegal? And it kind of came back to my critique on the fear of like psychological harm and the politics of experience. I think I've brought this up before, where it's like, we have inherently dangerous activities that we engage in. And yes, we hopefully have some sort of harm reduction technique. Every time I go snowboarding, I wear a helmet because I know the risks now of I could die again doing that. But I think like when I brought that up, it was mostly around like, as a culture, it seems like we're more afraid of the experience of substances sometimes versus like physiological harm, physical harms to the body. And obviously, with like fentanyl overdoses, that's the outcome that you don't want. So to some extent, we're thinking about physical harm there. But I think when I was bringing that up, I've brought that up before, just the idea of like this politics of experience. Like, and we can get at this a little bit more in a new research study that just came out about predicting bad trips. And why are we so concerned about somebody's like psychological well-being versus physical well-being at times?
It kind of seems like, why are we only concerned about someone's psychological well-being when it has to do with drugs? Because in every other circumstance, like, what would help my psychological well-being? Like a higher salary, like all these other things, right? But I guess that's not like an answer. But I do like how Dr. Hart really brings this home, where it's like, well, if you really want to help someone, like just talk therapy, like might not be enough. Like if you want to help someone who's living in like a bad living situation, it's actually going to be like a lot more hands-on than most social workers are really professionally able to help. It's like, well, can you help them get training so they can get a better job, so they can have a more stable life? And I think that's part of our society, is we are holding down marginalized people by all these, barriers to entry, with education so expensive. Like, who can afford to go to college or graduate school? Like, it's, it really stops a lot of people because of the price. And it's something I've been thinking about. It's not like I have a good answer to it, but this is all very wrapped up in our society and our culture. How we view drugs, how we view heroin. I think this was in Dr. Carl Hart's book, but it's just something I've been thinking about while you guys were talking. It's like heroin, the heroin epidemic, like heroin was killing a lot of Black men in the 70s and no one cared.
Right.
And now that it's killing all these white people with, opioids and all this middle class stuff, all of a sudden we care and we want harm reduction and we want laws and we want drug checking, but no one gave a fuck 40 years ago. And so that's like, that always, something that weighs on me with this whole topic. But
yeah, and I think just thinking about like money and, economic status, just going back to like the rock climbing analogy, like somebody that wants to go engage in that activity might not have the money to afford helmets and harnesses and stuff like that. And so they're putting themselves maybe in more danger by just engaging in the activity because they're interested in it, by not having that safety gear. Whereas people that are able to afford that, are able to be really safe. And so, let's convert that to drug use. White upper class middle person that's able to afford possibly like underground MDMA assisted psychotherapy with pure MDMA versus somebody that may not be able to afford that therapy session, that is trying to actually seek that. Going back to Joe's little commentary, maybe they get MDMA that's bath salts and they don't have that setting because they can't afford it or they can't afford drug testing. And so I think that's really what they were pointing at too in that comment, now that I'm thinking about it, as you brought that up.
It's a good point, actually. I mean, not the greatest one, but like I can see where they're coming from. Like, we are at a position of privilege. Like, I think for me, coming out about drug use is hard because I realize my privilege. And it's like, is it really matter when I come out about my drug use? Because I've been so privileged. Like, I have this support system. I'm a white woman. Like, my family will never, they'll always have my back. So I know that. So maybe I feel a little safer to use these drugs because I just don't feel like there's not a lot of risk in a way, besides maybe getting hurt physically or psychologically. I don't know. And so I really wonder, like, what are the benefits of me coming out about, I use psychedelics now and I'm really out about it, but this is not the only class of drugs that I have a lot of experience with. I just don't know how to talk about it without making it sound like heroin's cool and everyone should go use it. Because I don't believe that. Heroin gets tricky. But I don't know. I've been thinking about it. I gotta reassess, do some thinking about it and reflecting before I figure out how to come out in a responsible way, I suppose, because you can come out in an irresponsible way. I think it's pretty popular for actors and musicians to be glorifying drugs. And actually, this is something me and my friends have been talking about a lot, lately. So we had the war on drugs and drugs were bad, weed, psychedelics, they'll make you go crazy. And now we have these things it's that part of the drug war is sort of ending and we're legalizing them and we're making money off of them. So all of a sudden we've gone from one untruth, which is all drugs are bad, to this kind of other untruth, which is weed and psychedelics, they'll save your life. They're great. Everyone should use them. And it's fuck, dude, where was the middle? Where was the neutral? Where was the actual truth? Because I'm really struggling to find it all the time. And I'm just I don't know, it's frustrating. I guess it's when capitalism gets involved, but can we do this in a more grown-up, neutral, truth, fact-based way? And I love that's what Dr. Carl Hart is getting at with his work. But I think it's really hard for people, or just our emotions, our past, everything gets in the way of that. And we have trouble seeing the truth because we also don't know who to trust. And I'll just go down a rabbit hole forever with this one. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, when I was listening to his book on Audible, when I wasn't able to, I guess I was hanging outside at Horizons when he first disclosed his use there. So I might have missed that. So I was listening to the book and I was like kind of taken back. I was like, whoa, I had no idea. And, you know, it definitely stirred up a lot of stuff in me because, again, like the town that I grew up in, a lot of people have used opioids or heroin, and I've seen the destruction in their lives. And there's part of me, I'm like, could people use this responsibly? Like, I've seen people go down really dark paths with it. Again, though, like, did they have the education? If we lived in a different paradigm where we had a different narrative around these substances, could it have been different? And so I'm sitting there, you know, getting triggered by, you know, is he, you know, to some people, it sounds like he might be promoting the use. Like, I can use this responsibly. And, you know, other people can too. Whereas, like, there's other people that, you know, might not be able to, right? And I know he did mention in his book that people with like significant trauma and certain histories might be more susceptible to overuse and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, that when I first heard that, it definitely triggered a lot of stuff in me, and I had to pull back and do some reflection, hear his story, and, you know, really work with my internal state, which is not easy because all these other past experiences are coming up, my biases are coming up, and I'm just like, you know, wrestling with it a little bit. At least
you're aware of it, though. I mean, that's like what this work is, right? If you're not wrestling with stuff all the time, I'm like, then what are you doing? But yeah, no, that's a good point of view. I appreciate that, Kyle.
So this activist and PhD candidate, Hillary Aggrove from UBC, she had a post this morning that was shared by Trip Project. It says, bars are safe consumption sites and liquor stores provide a safe supply. People who use other drugs deserve the same. And you know, what are we doing? Like, are we taking a science-based approach to policy? No, we're not. We haven't ever. No. And we're actually deliberately doing harm because it's helpful for a lot of reasons that Carl lays out in his book. And, you know, safe supply is a big deal. By not allowing for a safe supply, we are amplifying harm like crazy. Narconomics, an amazing book running down, you know, if you actually cared to stop the drug war, you would not be doing anything that you're doing right now. And this is an economist making a, you know, detailed analysis of cartels, the DEA, et cetera. And it's not the case they want to stop. So heroin with a safe supply, barely anybody dies, especially if you have supervised injection sites. You know,
or like Dr. Carl Hart was saying, you don't even need to inject if it was like medical grade heroin. I didn't really realize that injection is mostly a function of like, because there's so many impurities in street heroin that you have to inject to like get the feeling. So interesting. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but that was something that kind of blew my mind in a way.
And he's done a lot more work with people struggling with addiction than almost anybody I've heard of, because he's administering crack cocaine and, you know, literally doing, you know, boots on the ground research. Like, he went into favelas in Brazil to learn about what was going on with drugs there. Yeah, it's just amazing. And this whole idea, like, I think the most important part for us to hear is like, you know, are psychedelics inherently good? I've heard a number of leaders in the space who I don't necessarily respect super highly say things like, psychedelics are love. Like, I'm like, yeah, right. Cool. Sure. Like, does love patent hand holding and spin Charles Manson and others out to do horrifying things? Like, you know, look at Martin Ball. First time saying that name on the show in a while. Like, this stuff is crazy. And psychedelics aren't necessarily good. Drugs aren't necessarily good. Beer isn't necessarily good. The way it's used, context is king. And, you know, like, people who are wealthy and use heroin probably die a lot less than people who are poor and use heroin.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are wealthy using ayahuasca probably have better results than really, really, really poor people using ayahuasca, especially in a country like the United States. So what does that mean? Like, we need to take a really careful look at that. And like, is the socioeconomic situation in our country, the primary driver of bad outcomes for most things? Like, I was listening to who's this guy? Plays Tobias Funke in Arrested Development. David Cross, one of my favorite comedians in the world. He did this whole rundown on medicine in America. And it was like 11 minutes of like heavy duty talking points. And it's like, highest cost of healthcare, pretty bad outcomes relative to, similarly esteemed countries, Germany, et cetera. Like, what is that about? And, we were talking earlier, Michelle, you can get a test for $10. Like, I can't go see a doctor for less than $50. And that's with insurance.
It costs less than, it costs like $2 to go get to go to the doctor. And then I got blood work for $10 and other like tests for like $25. And and that's without insurance. That's without a copay. That's just
so
at,
we
like,
used
a
an
clinic.
example of this lady who had to take an extra day off from Walmart because she wasn't feeling well, got fired, was found like 5 days later dead in her house because she couldn't afford healthcare and all this other stuff. People delay going to the doctor quite often because of, financial situations.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely the case with me. It's quite risky to do that. And we saw a lot of deaths, somewhat related to COVID because people weren't going to the doctor. People were dying. They weren't getting the care they needed because they were afraid to go, or they were told not to or something, and then they die. And should those count as COVID deaths? Like, I think we should tack those on in a certain way, like total deaths versus COVID immediate, like direct death.
It is so crazy.
Way over 500,000 at that point.
Like, I mean, but can you imagine if you had to go on one of those oxygen machines? That would probably bankrupt me and be like the thing I had to pay for the rest of my life. Because I have like Medicaid. I don't have real health. I have health insurance, but like barely in the US. So I'm like terrified to go get sick in the US. I'd rather get sick here.
Medical debt's largely unheard of outside of the US. I've had plenty of medical debt. It's not cool. What do we do about it? I don't know. Like, pay careful attention, try to work towards a system that's a little bit better than what we've got right now, which is probably not that hard. And, see what we can do. But we've got to understand root causes, right? It's this relationship between insurance companies, hospitals, pharma, et cetera. It's a really whack situation. And, doctors should really focus on doing the best medical practice they can. But we need advocates inside the space to really shake things up and clean this whole mess up. And this lays cleanly into, psychedelic therapies and, psychedelics generally. Over 10,000 for treating PTSD. Is it worth it? Probably. Can you afford it? Maybe with a loan. Or maybe you can't at all, There's portions of this country that are in worse than third world conditions. Certain parts of West Virginia and elsewhere, it's like full tilt poverty, desperation. They're not going to be able to go there because they don't have the credit to get that kind of medical debt.
And yet they probably have higher rates of PTSD than the middle class.
Yeah, socioeconomic status matches quite well, tracks quite well with trauma, I think. Not a social worker, so I don't have that data, but yeah. I guess let's dig in to the rest of the articles because we could go on a doomy, gloomy rant for hours, I'm sure. But let's choose the positive when we can. All right. So yeah, this one's real positive. So High Times put this article out about the governor of Nebraska, Ricketts, saying marijuana will kill your children. And he's leaning on DEA scheduling for his data points, right? It's like, it's up there with heroin. It's going to kill your kids. And who was it? Like the executive director from Normal says, as soon as he saw that, he had to look at his calendar, like look at his clock. Is it 1950? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Anything you two picked up on that article?
I mean, to me, it's like so crazy, mostly because, so it's in Nebraska, right? And all they want is medical marijuana. They're not even talking about adult use. It's right next to Colorado, which has had adult use forever, which I guess is probably like...
They were a little upset about it, honestly, because there's a lot that
right?
comes
That's
through.
what I thought. And I was kind of like reading between the lines. So that's kind of like probably where this reaction comes from. But I also feel like I've read data, now I don't have it in front of me, but that teen use in Colorado of weed has gone down since legalization, right? Because it's like, it's not this bad, like cool thing anymore if your mom and dad are going to the store every weekend and buying it. And it's just like lame, right? And which I can get actually. And I've actually like talked to parents, you know, when I was reporting more on weed, I wrote a bunch of stories on like, you know, talking to kids about cannabis, like parents who work in the industry. And they're all just like Carl Hart was saying in the interview, like very just honest with their kids. You know, I had moms telling me like things that they would tell their daughters, like, listen, like try not to smoke weed before you turn 18. And then we'll like, you know, fly to Colorado together and like we can go like do legal weed, because she was like living in Virginia. And I think at the time the age was 18. I guess now it's 21. Similar thing to what you hear about alcohol. I mean, it doesn't exactly work with teens, but I think a lot of parents are like, listen, if you can like moderate or, you know, just like then on like I can reward you. We can like go on a cruise and you can drink us like together and I can show you like what is moderation. That's like what I keep coming back to that's left out of all these conversations. It's like moderation is a thing that we're all capable of and we do with other things all the time. Just because something is addictive, like alcohol's addictive, most of us still drink it in moderation. But anyway, so yeah, this article, I mean, I'm glad I've actually noticed High Times and Mary Jane, both cannabis publications, have been doing more of this, just like calling out senators and public figures who are saying like completely ridiculous, non-fact-based stuff about cannabis, to be like, yo, wait, what? We're living in 2021. Like I thought we were past this with cannabis, but clearly, you know, we're not. But I do appreciate that these weed mags aren't only publishing like, you know, CBD cures everything kind of articles and more moving toward like actually we still have work to do. And I think that's really cool. I don't know if you had any thoughts about this one, Kyle.
I just thought this quote here by Ricketts, big pot, big marijuana is a big industry. This is a big industry that's trying not to be regulated, to go around the regulatory process, and that's going to put people at risk. When you go around regulations that are designed for the health and safety of our society, and I don't know, scratching my head, because I mean, in some states, it's pretty well regulated, like alcohol, right? Like, what's the difference there? So I'm wondering
everybody
if it's
wants
like,
regulation except for the black market people.
Yeah.
Maybe he has a stake in the black market, because obviously people are smoking weed in Nebraska and like it's unregulated, and like actually the best thing you can do for all the stoners or weed smokers or whatever the hell you want to call them in Nebraska is to legalize. People drive me insane.
Yeah, you know, Michelle, this is actually a good talk track. I don't think we've had a chance to chat with you about this. So black market prices here in Colorado are a lot lower than at a dispensary, even if you're getting like medical products at, you know, usually priced better than recreational products. And, you know, like black market, at least, you know, regular flower is pretty damn cheap right now. And I'm seeing this interesting tension, you know, as we want to tax and regulate. Are we driving more people into the black market because there's still some sort of like cost benefit analysis people need to, you know, make for themselves? And, you know, there's this, some people have been growing for like I don't want to say 100 years, but 80 years or something, right? And their cannabis is amazing. And it's, you know, the most, what's the term? It's like boutique cannabis, right? It's like beautiful. You've got you've got a little extra trust in this person because you have some sort of relationship, like farmer market style. And that's wildly different when you go to a retail outlet where faceless corporations kind of ship products, right? And there's this kind of disconnect there not only with pricing, but like, feel of the experience. And that's like a really weird deal. And it's kind of the thought I had when I read that line earlier that Kyle just read. It's like there's this dichotomy here, and there's incentives for people to stay in the black market still.
Totally.
And I remember Paul Rosen in some talk a while ago, Kyle, saying something along the lines of, we need to stop spending so much money in doing enforcement on these actual businesses and start enforcing in the black markets, where I'm like, I don't really get that, but okay, maybe, in the interest of keeping people safe. Like, I think black market cannabis can be complicated in terms of fungicide, pesticide, weird fertilizers, et cetera, weird curing processes. And, that's the main risk. But if you have like a good friendship with your grower, you've seen the grow, they're only using like organic stuff. Like, that's a different deal than buying on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think like there's still barriers to entry for the legal market. Like there's
totally.
so many growers who just can't afford the licensing, right? And stuff like that. And so it is hard to transition because you need like $500,000 to start like a legal cannabis business. And I know in California, the prices are like that high. The licenses are very expensive. And so if you're an underground grower, you've been growing for like generations, like you say 80 years, but some of these are like third generation. They're like daughters, granddaughters of growers, right? And like, yeah, it's tricky. It's not that I like encourage I try to call it not the black market anymore, more like the underground market or like the unregulated market. I have a lot of friends who still buy in it, even though they live in California, because it's massively cheaper. Like weed in California at dispensaries is really expensive. And it's, if you can get like a whole ounce for the price of an eighth, like from your guy, like, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. I've never lived in a place with legal weed, even though I'm like so open about this shit. So I really can't speak from experience being from New York, New Jersey, and now in Mexico. Like Mexico's really close and it's really exciting. And New York and New Jersey are pretty close too, and it's sort of exciting, but they're all at like the same rate right now. And so I don't know. I guess I wish like this just kind of comes back to, this is like a government thing. Like actually, maybe the taxes are too high. Maybe the barriers of entry are too high. Maybe we needed more equity programs to transition underground, marginalized growers and trimmers and all this kind of stuff to the legal market in a better way. It's hard because I think that was the main selling point, was the tax revenue to like the middle class, all the politicians. They really didn't care about anything else. They were like, listen, we're going to make a lot of money. It's basically like it's less dangerous.
That's always
than
the talk
alcohol.
track, right?
It's always it. It's the only way to convince people like, but we're going to make so much money. But I did see a headline. I forget what state it was, but they just did $400,000 of cannabis tax revenue just went to reparations for BIPOC people. But I have to find, I don't know what state it was. Sorry. I should have this stuff in front of me.
New Jersey's been trying to be a little bit more socially justice oriented. I mean, they've been pretty open about that. And I think they're going to try to get licenses to some marginalized communities to be able to set up retail and stuff like that. So that's exciting to hear. I'm glad that they're kind of focusing on that as well. If they execute, I guess that's another story.
I know. Illinois will use weed tax to fund nation's first government reparations program. This is in Rolling Stone one day ago. For black citizens specifically, which is awesome, for black residents of Illinois. That's the kind of stuff I guess I was naive in the beginning and thought we were going to see more of when this was all starting to change. But I'm glad it's happening, and I hope that there's similar things with psychedelic therapy.
Let us pray. Yeah. So, any comments on the Biden administration firing all these admitted cannabis smokers?
I didn't see that.
I read a little bit about it, but really interesting.
Yeah, the Blacklist on Instagram is posting a bunch of news stories on it. Then they posted a parody: Obama not allowed to work in the White House as a consultant because of past admitted cannabis use. I was like, are you kidding? That's amazing. It was kind of like an Onion parody, but it was still out there and it still had a, little bit of truth there.
Yeah, I wonder how many of those staffers are on cocaine and Adderall, though, honestly.
The rest of them. Yeah. Yeah. Like, how much Adderall did Trump blow in his life? Like, probably at least 10 pounds. And then he's coming, propping up the drug war further. Yeah.
It's really disappointing, Biden. I'm really disappointed.
I knew to be disappointed going in.
Yeah,
but,
I wasn't very excited.
Who didn't? Like, how many people did those two put in prison for pot?
Yeah.
But still, like, I don't know, there's so much hope in like stocks. Cannabis stocks rose so much when Biden got elected because everyone's like, oh, we're going to federally legalize, like business as usual. Like, I
think the DNC had some sort of position paper on that. Like, it was part of the plan. But I don't know.
At the end, maybe.
If the
like
old
3
man
years.
is into it.
Yeah.
At a certain point, I think the presidents kind of separate from the party, maybe. Anyway, we're going off the rails. Let's go on to the next one here. Sorry, everybody. So our friend CJ, who teaches a really cool class on our platform, Psychedelic Education Center, sent us this study from a while back in relation to the recent podcast with Balazs and what was the other gentleman's name?
David Arizzo.
Arizzo, yeah. And this study seemed to have really, really, really similar results to their self-reported, self-blinded microdosing study. And this was with SSRIs. Kyle, do you have anything you can comment on about this study?
I didn't actually get to go through it as much, unfortunately.
But I've heard of this study. It came out in 2008, and it basically found that the placebo was almost as effective as SSRIs. Like, it also, like the microdosing researchers were telling us a couple weeks ago, that there wasn't a statistical significant difference. And so there is a bit of a difference. Like, the people who were taking SSRIs were like a little bit more well off, and it also depended on how severe their depression was, on how much they benefited or not from both SSRIs and placebo. But it's basically the same thing they just found with microdosing. And I find that really interesting. Like, is this both expectation effect? And we're just like, we're taking the pill, whether it's sugar or LSD or Prozac, and we're more like manifesting our hopes about what it'll do than it's doing anything, in a way, which I think is kind of beautiful and interesting. And I still want to, like, I don't know, harness the placebo effect somehow. And so I think that was, from the abstract, the first line of the abstract is, meta-analyses of antidepressant medications have reported only modest benefits over placebo treatment. And when unpublished trial data are included, the benefit falls below accepted criteria for clinical significance. And so, is it the med or... Yeah, it's really interesting, I think.
Well, it's interesting
so the lead
too.
author, Kirsch, actually wrote the book, The Emperor's New Clothes, which details like how fraudulent a lot of the SSRI data is.
After working in this field for a while. Yeah, exactly. It's
The Emperor's New Drugs, exploding the antidepressant myth. And there's a lot of, pharma's done some shady stuff. Pharma can and does lie. Has been proven to lie. And, they don't have to publish the studies often that support, don't support what they want to say. So what does that mean? Like, who do we trust? And is it the FDA that just kind of like folds to these people? It's kind of like a revolving door with pharma and the FDA often. Big questions. And, SSRIs help people I know personally. I also know people who claim to have been hurt severely by SSRIs.
Right.
Is that true or not? I have no data. I can't tell you. But this is a report I get here and there.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, even just about the placebo effect and physiological changes due to SSRI and maybe brain chemistry. And like, I know plenty of people that have just cold turkeyed some of their SSRIs and, have had really, really difficult times. So, is something else going on there as well than just placebo? People talk about some type of the brain zaps that happen getting off SSRIs and
I've heard that. It's scary stuff. I guess, I think another thing that's important to mention about SSRIs is like, we actually don't really know how they help people. We have some ideas, we have some theories, like the scientific community, but they don't have like a definitive, like, this is how it works, like you have with other medications, like heart meds and stuff, because the brain and the mind and depression is a little more elusive. It's harder to figure out. But I think that's important to mention. And, it was weird when I was reading this study, I read the editor's notes in the beginning, right under the abstract, thinking like, oh yeah, I'll just read this and then I'm done. But the editor's notes weren't great. Like they had all these lines on how like, well, depression's caused by a chemical imbalance and SSRIs might help it. And I was like, who is this editor? Is he not reading the research? Because this doesn't sound very right to me. I was like poking holes in like every line of it. I was like, wait, do we really believe this as a scientific community? Because that's not what I thought. And I think that's what
chemical imbalance is gone. Like that's no longer.
But I think a lot of the people for who SSRIs work for, they believe in the chemical imbalance and they believe that SSRI is working. Now, is that placebo because it's all their expectation? Or, or is there, there must be something else going on if the withdrawal is so bad. Like, I don't mean to totally like throw SSRIs under the bus because they do help people, but.
Well, the serotonergic system is certainly impacted. Right?
Yeah.
But it's, and when you start withdrawing, like there's something going on there. Like there is for sure physiological biochem change, but that's not necessarily evidence in the, for the chemical imbalance, like hypothesis, right? It's just, okay, now we're literally changing your chemicals and things substantially change. It's a weird one.
It is. It is.
What to do about it? We're going to need to take a cold, hard look at what is fact and what is fiction, and how do we catch medicine up to the state of science? Medicine seems to be 10 to 30 years behind science often. I don't know what to do about that. But I know for sure it's a big problem. Yeah. And I've experienced it plenty. Sorry, doctors. I don't mean to insult you, but it's like, it's your field. It's not you as an individual. If you're listening to this show, clearly you're ahead of the curve. And, there's a lot going on in this space, and medicine's evolving more rapidly than it ever has, probably. The technological developments, like just imagine what quantum computing is going to do to medicine. And, how are people going to keep up? Like, I don't know that you can. At a certain point. That's why you got to like really, really niche out.
And I always find it interesting just on this topic, like to bring it back to psychedelics, just how much of a role LSD played in like catalyzing like, medication. And I think partly of that, chemical imbalance theory. So here's some quotes too. This is Chemistry World. I have some other ones up, but this is just the one I have up right now. Researchers at numerous laboratories hypothesized that serotonin might play an important role in mental function, that alteration of brain serotonin might be involved in mental illness. Indeed, when Sandoz initially began supplying LSD to scientists, it was provided in the belief that it produced a model psychosis, so that psychiatrists could take LSD and gain a glimpse into the world of the mentally ill. The connection between mental illness and disturbances of neurochemistry was firmly cemented into place by the discovery of LSD. The idea was extremely controversial and not widely embraced, but the implications were enormous. The LSD-serotonin connection served as a major catalyst for the revolution in neuroscience that continues unabated today. The role of serotonin in the brain continues to be a topic of extremely high research interest. Drugs that alter serotonin neurotransmission include the new generation antidepressants such as Prozac and Zoloft, and others. which lack the toxic effect of older generation of drugs. So yeah, always interesting to come back to how LSD also played a role in the development of some of these medications.
Mm. Yeah, it's big stuff. And these are big questions, and this is why we're here, right? Like, if they're not interesting and hard questions, like, what are you doing? You know, playing Jeopardy, maybe. So I guess on to the next one, in the interest of time. And Michelle, this is the article you pointed out from the Times related to Oregon. What can you tell us about this one?
Yeah, so the New York Times had an opinion piece by Ezra Klein, who's pretty, famous journalist and podcaster. He's the founder of Vox.com, I'm pretty sure. So he has this opinion piece called "Can Magic Mushrooms Heal Us?" A very promising mental health experiment is taking shape in Oregon. And it was also in like the print issue of the Times, So for me, I saw it all over social media, and immediately I was like, oh, damn, the New York Times, are covering this. And when I read it, I was quite happy. I think Ezra Klein has a pretty nuanced understanding of psychedelics, or, he did his research and it was like, oh, it was pretty good. It goes through, what's happening in Oregon, and it's like a good little rundown for the mainstream of this psilocybin-assisted therapy program trying to be developed right now. And then also just a little bit about how mushrooms work and what the studies are saying. And, he does go into a bit about how mushrooms, maybe they work in part by making you more open. He's quoting Matt Johnson at Johns Hopkins, because it seems like they talked on the phone for this. He doesn't mention Catherine McLean, who is actually the first author and discovered that personality trait change, that perhaps you do become more open. That they found that you do become more open after the psilocybin-assisted therapy at Johns Hopkins. So I just wanted to give Catherine credit for that real quick.
Did you catch that, or did she mention it somewhere?
I didn't see her mention it. I just caught that and wanted to say something publicly, personally. But so he has this great quote in here about his own personal use, and I just thought it was really nuanced, and I wanted to just I have a note here. Fuck yeah, Ezra gets it. I just wanted to read this really quick. He talks about how he avoided psychedelics when he was younger because he was afraid of loss of control. But then he says, I tried them later desperately when there was more darkness in my mind than light. It was not an easy time for me. These were not easy experiences. They kicked down doors around my anxiety, my marriage, my work, my family, my resentments, my attachments, myself. Those rooms were often unpleasant to enter. There was ecstasy and beauty, yes, but also fear, and so often, intense nausea. Things I'd fought to ignore resurfaced. Disparate parts of my life and beliefs and personality connected, and I became more legible to myself. This is the part I really liked. I am not cleansed of anxiety, but I am more aware that my outlook at any given moment is just a dance of brain chemistry and experience, and far from the only state possible. That a few micrograms of chemical was all it took to upend my confident grip on reality, shook me in ways I'm grateful for. I hold my judgments and worldviews more lightly, and I am friendlier to mystery and strangeness. And that's I really like that line, because that's really kind of sums up my own psychedelic use. And whether it's, I'm going in intentionally for healing or just for fun or just for curiosity, what I come out with is a little bit more just openness and acceptance. And I can see my own shit a little more clearly, and I'm more loose with it. I'm not so rigid. And there, I just thought that was a really great way to approach the mainstream about how this stuff works, rather than the old narrative where, it was really glorifying and that everything's going to be fixed and, that kind of thing I'm always complaining about. So, and it also goes into why 109 is so exciting. And for him, he really points out the fact that you don't need a diagnosis to participate in the program in Oregon, which is also something I think is really cool. And, you can just go in for, you don't have to be treatment-resistant depression, for example, or PTSD. You can just be a normal, not that those people aren't normal people, but I think that people without the diagnosis or people without the funds to go to the psychiatrist to get the diagnosis, another group, they still, we're still struggling with life shit all the time. And, there's just a lot on our minds. There's resentments, there's bias, whatever. And mushrooms and other psychedelics can help see those things. And it doesn't have to be this whole binary thing. It can just be part of life and this ongoing growth and maturity. And so it's, I really appreciated his insight on that.
Kyle, I'm kind of curious, from you really like James Hillman, and there's this idea of all right, so very different tracks, right? Okay, you're diagnosed with this thing, and this treatment treats that thing, and then hopefully you're cured at the end of it, right? Versus this idea of gaining a deeper self-knowledge, know thyself, or relationship with self and other and the world. Right? Can you speak about that? Or does that trigger anything for you?
I think that something that comes up is just more process oriented, healing as a process versus an end goal. And that it's always changing. We're always changing our relationship to that thing that we're carrying. And I guess if we're talking about mental health disorders and issues like depression, anxiety, trauma, we're always carrying that with us. But I think something that you pointed out in that article, it's I've shifted a little bit from that, right? Just shifting perspective. And I think that's a really important thing is how do we understand this more as a process than you're going to heal this thing. And I think when I think about more of the depth-oriented work of James Hillman, his whole spiel at times is, we've really taken psyche out of psychology. We remove soul, coming back to the Greek word psyche, out of the practice of psychology. And can we incorporate that back in? And it's more of I think a romantic idea at times, right? Bringing this depth-oriented approach of working with this energy versus he talks about soul being different than spirit. Soul's this life creative energy that flows through us. And sometimes it gets stagnant. So I guess if we're looking at alternative or traditional systems of healing, right? So Chinese medicine, talking about qi, right? This energy that flows through us. Sometimes it gets blocked, right? And so, thinking about soul, this energy that flows through us, sometimes it gets blocked. Sometimes it wants to express certain things. Sometimes it wants to move. It wants to do things. And what happens when we just continue to say that's bad and we just psychopathologize it? Does that actually help at times? Versus really accepting it and taking this more romantic, depth-oriented approach. And I understand, sometimes it has that limitations when people can't really tap into that because it's almost outside of our language now. And how do we connect with psyche at this point? How could we incorporate it? We don't live in the Greek animistic world anymore. So psyche really isn't a thing that is, familiar with most people. But I think that was, part of Hillman's take is how do we bring psyche, soul back into the field? And again, I come back to this process and this relationship. How do we develop a relationship with it? And these are ongoing processes that are continuing to unfold. And it's not just an end goal. I'm going to heal this thing. I'm going to be done. It's opened up something else. It's going to unfold. And we're going to have to continue to engage in that work, which, I don't like to hear it either. I'm I want to be done with it and close that up and, put it in the past. But, it's always changing. It's always unfolding. And I think it's a lifelong process. And again, I think that kind of comes back to part of Hillman's idea of soul making, soul crafting, right? Just thinking of this image of this block of clay and this being us. And we're really shaping it. We're fine tuning it over the years and years. And it's changing form constantly. It changes as we age. And how do we develop that relationship with over time and continue to mold and craft it?
Right. Because what is life? Is it getting sick and then getting well and a bounce back? Or is it like a long process journey of, this wandering soul in the wilderness trying to figure it out and then trying to help others and have relationships? And yeah. And read 45 articles on ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Like, does that relate at all to this story that Kyle just shared? Like, it could help inform it a little bit, but it doesn't like get to the essence of it, which I think is really important. And that's, this is our bent, right? Like depth psychology. This is our orientation. So there's always going to be critiques of what's going on out there to hopefully bring more soul and humanity into this thing, right?
Yeah, I'm obviously taking this from a very depth transpersonal orientation, bringing like the soul's journey into this. And, what is our purpose here? A lot of existentialism. Who are we? How do we like really get to know this? And I think this just really kind of pops in my head, just thinking back from my near-death experience and some of these psychedelic experiences. I mean, that's what it kind of got me tapped into. It was like, I've touched something that I don't even know how to explain. I don't know how to put it into words. And it wants to jump up and express itself. And, when I block it or suppress it or push it away, it causes issues. It causes problems. And how do you really embrace those certain things? And, I've done a lot of like analyzing around, my different mental states, depression, this and that. And I've always kind of connected it to this energy at times, whether I'll call that psyche or soul, whatever it is. And it's a process. It's a relationship in my mind. And how do we get in touch with that? How do we develop that relationship and honor it? It's a much different approach, I think it's more of a romantic approach at times. It doesn't come with, these biochemical imbalance theories and more behavioral approaches. But, again, I don't know. This is why I'm in the transpersonal depth. It's like there's something deeper here at times from my perspective of like confronting death and going into those realms. Like, how are we showing up in life? I don't think most of us are really thinking about that at times. We get caught up in the motion. But I mean, I keep coming back to this is the strangest trip you'll ever experience. And if you're not thinking about it, then I don't know. I mean, it's pretty wild that we're here.
It's the classical dilemma between romanticism and the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Like this is a situation we've been dealing with for a long time. Aristotle, Plato.
Yeah.
Same dichotomy. And it just keeps reappearing. Thankfully, we're like getting really, I think we're getting a lot better and in a lot of ways really good at humanistic psychology. And I'm really excited about the direction of it. Certainly I'm excited about the other angles too, but I think this is the most interesting and the most humane. Yeah. I'm reading Saving Normal right now about the guy that helped coordinate DSM-4 or 5 or something. And he's talking about the process of like getting an agreement on like what is the definition for this thing or criteria for this thing. And it was just dudes yelling for 4 hours. And often the person that spoke to the scribe last got a better, stake in the definition. It's like so crazy. And it's like, it's helpful, sure. It's also quite problematic. But what if we just treated people in this more humanistic tradition? I know it probably has scale issues and there's a lot of problems there.
Well, how do you teach that? It's like trying to teach intuition at times, right? It's like, how do you do that? Or
get people engaged in their own thing, right? It's like how we came up. How do you teach someone to be a Rogerian or a, Jungian or Freudian for that matter?
Go do your own work. You
got to do your own work. You got to hang out with others and like keep learning. And it's a fucking process. And at a certain point, you become a master, right? Like Hillman's kind of a master. We got to make more of those. We'll get there. But we need it all, right? Like brain imaging's helpful. Drugs are helpful. Traditional psychology psychiatry can be helpful. It's helped a lot of people. Certainly a lot better than it was in the 1850s. We've come a long way. And
Yeah, how could we create like a more integrative field? I was actually thinking about this a few days ago. It's like just thinking about like how transpersonal came out of the humanistic movement because they needed something new. We're at a new point where there's like, how do we incorporate and integrate, a lot of this neuroscience, the somatics, the transpersonal, the depth, and like what could a new field look like? So I've been doing some brainstorming and envisioning on what would that look like to create a new branch of psychology that really incorporates and integrates a lot of this stuff and the impact that psychedelics have like had on this. And what type of theories and frameworks do we need moving forward as psychedelics become more integrated into the culture and into the medical realm? Do we need to bring Psyche back a little bit with the psychedelics to really help give a framework or some context to some of these transpersonal and numinous experiences? So people, they come back and, they're left with some of these existential questions of, then, how do you have some sort of framework to work with after that experience? I think it's important. Instead of it just being so behavioral, right? And being like, oh, behavior change, like.
Yeah. Huh.
So there's an optimistic thing. I'm not 100% sure how to feel about it, but in Arkansas, home of Walmart, et cetera, the Waltons and a number of other wealthy people are trying to develop a new health paradigm. And I believe they've tapped people like Andy Weil, Deepak Chopra, and others. And I think they are looking at psychedelics too. So
Cool.
they're looking at creating some sort of new model hospital, somewhere near Fayetteville, I believe. I don't 100% know where in Arkansas, but this is going to be big news once this comes out because they're, philanthropists do what they do. Sometimes they're amazing, sometimes not, but they are really serious about trying to revolutionize the way we do health. And it's currently not very pretty the way we do health, especially in America. So, yeah. So we're coming up on an hour, so I want to jump to the next topic. Sorry, Michelle, if you wanted any commentary there, but this last one from Science Blog, predicting who may do best with psychedelic-assisted therapy. I feel like that, that title's a little problematic. And this is from Science Blog. I don't think that's the title of the actual study, right?
No, the title of the actual study is Predicting Reactions to Psychedelic Drugs, a systematic review of states and traits related to acute drug effects.
Right. And of course, Alan Davis is going to do well with a title like that and, not kind of blow it with, a science blogger. So who else was on this? Jacob Ede, Alan Davis, Kayla Mitskovich, Emily Bloch, and Christopher C. Davoli. This is one of the cool things about Alan Davis, by the way. He always works with young scientists and helps bring in new voices to the space. And I really appreciate that about Alan. Michelle, have you had a chance to meet him yet?
No, I saw him speak at Horizons and I'm like a fan. I think
Yeah.
he's really
he's
cool.
such a sweetheart,
I've never
too.
met him. Yeah. I think he seems really cool. Me cae
so
muy bien,
nice.
pero no.
And he cares so much about doing really good, careful work. And it's awesome. But Kyle, what was your impression of this study here?
I thought it was interesting. And in the actual study here, they started off with some quotes. And we were kind of asking like, whoa, what was the overall goal of this study? And maybe, so there's a quote here by Anderson Cooper. Can we tell who's going to have a bad trip, who is going to like have a transcendent experience? And then Roland Griffiths. Our ability to predict that is almost none at all. So they reviewed 14 studies, 14 public clinical trials and other studies conducted in the recent years to document participants' personality traits or states of mind and their associations with a positive or negative experience on psychedelics. And yeah, I thought it was interesting because it's like, I guess moving forward, one of their, let me go down here. I lost my spot on this paper. Just thinking about like future research, like how to prepare people for these experiences and just maybe thinking about like, if we can predict that, could we start somebody off with like smaller doses, low to moderate doses, so they don't have a big reaction? And they said application of this knowledge could have broad implications for psychedelic science, including increasing confidence in treatment selection, saving resources spent on ineffective treatments, attenuating the prevalence of adverse reactions, and improving therapeutic efficacy. And so some of the things that they found was people that have trauma. So this is a quote here, I believe by Alan Davis. People who have experienced trauma are not very high in surrender because they're anxious all the time about their past traumatic experiences. The possibility to explore starting with low or moderate dose prior to giving the full therapeutic dose, which might help them increase in surrender. Yeah, I think it could be helpful to really understand how people could react to benefit like it would be interesting to see how like the outcomes, like how many people have benefited from maybe different protocols that they develop when they're able to maybe assess how somebody could react. But yeah, right. Psychedelics are these interesting things, coming back to Stan Grof's statement of non-specific amplifiers of mental or psychic processes. Like sometimes we don't even really know what's in there. And, maybe, there's been times in the past where I was like, I don't know if this is the right time. I could be really anxious. Wonderful time. It was difficult, but had, I think a really great therapeutic outcome. And then other times feeling really good and then just being like, whew, that was really difficult, So I think, it'd be interesting to really track the therapeutic outcome there as well to see, again, like, why are we so focused on why do we need to predict a bad trip? Could these quote unquote bad or challenging experiences actually be more therapeutic? And I know there's been research on that stating that there is.
So I'd say there's something here about if we can lower, people's stress in the experience, we probably should. If the bad stuff happens, we can handle it. Or the suffering gets a little ramped up, we can handle it. But it can just be a core part of the process, right? Like this is kind of what we've been talking about for ages. It's, I know of a study where they're trying to get through their ethics review board and they're a little nervous about bad trips. And that's the main thing they're concerned about. They're not concerned about anything physiological, psychological, long-term thing, but in the experience itself, they're worried about that. And this is something we're going to have to run up against a lot. But it's like, our difficult experience is helpful. Like they've been very helpful for me. They've certainly, sent me on this long, complicated journey. But is that helpful for somebody at end of life? Is that more helpful for somebody in middle age or in their 30s or something? Probably. But are you going to have a good therapeutic outcome in your, final months on Earth? Your last two weeks to 6 months. Probably. Like the story, Kyle, you bring up about our the person we knew from a retreat that was like, I'm kind of done. I just want to connect with people and have a good time. Like, I don't need to get fixed. I'm okay not being enlightened. Like, connecting with people and smiling and laughing and being a normal human is okay. It's enough for me right now. And I'm like, that's a big deal. Like, let's consider that carefully. Like, there's some people out there in the psychedelic space who are, no, we have to get enlightened, and do you? No, I don't think so. And especially if it pulls you away from being a helpful human on Earth.
Yeah.
I don't know. Michelle, any comments?
It's interesting. I mean, I didn't read the whole paper, but I mean, the dose and the bad trip thing, both things I thought about a lot. Like, I do think that, maybe working people up to a higher dose could be beneficial. It's something that I do in my own personal practice when I'm starting with a new substance. I always start low and go slow. It's like my personal harm reduction 101 until I get more comfortable. At the same time, though, I will say low doses of mushrooms often a really bad time for me. I don't know what it is. I get stuck in the ick. Like,
what kind of dose?
Like 2 grams, like 2 grams.
I don't
I'm like,
consider 2 grams low.
okay, well, what I'm saying is, for me, that moderate dose zone can be really ugly. It can be kind of messy. It doesn't say it's not beneficial, but I often have this kind of like, why did I do this? I'm a fucking shitty person. Like, all my like things that I resent are with me. But if I go more like 4 or 5 grams, I get like above that. I'm like, I see it and I'm like, oh, it's okay, girl. Everyone makes mistakes. Like, you're going to be okay. I don't know if that happens to everyone, but I've definitely heard this from other mushroom people that like the lower moderate doses can be an icky place and the higher ones can be a little bit more of a mystical, beautiful, blissful place. What I'll also say is to get to that mystical, beautiful, blissful place, the come up is always nasty. I was talking to you guys about this earlier. I've been thinking about this in terms of my book and like, did I describe the come up well enough? Because I do feel like the come up, the first like 2 hours of the mushroom experience for me is icky. It's just like hard. I'm readjusting to this new reality. A lot of my hurts. I cry a lot during that time. It's just like all there with me. It's not a bad thing. And then I kind of like plateau, to like borrow language from Anne Shulgin uses this term when she talks about psychedelics. She's like, and like a lot, when they would all hang out together and try new substances, they'd be like, listen, I'm gonna go like do my own thing for the come up, like take a walk on the property, just get used to this. And then we can all like come back together and have more of the experience. That's not to say bad trip, challenging stuff doesn't come after hour like 3 or whatever. But for me, I don't know. It's all part of like the timeline and dose, and it's all very interconnected. But this is something I've only learned through practice, taking all different doses and different, mostly private situations like at my home or, camping and things. So it's different than the clinical trials and everything. And I realize that. But I do wonder if they started, doing the dose based on personality traits. I don't know if they're going to find exactly what they think. Like, I don't think a low dose is going to necessarily be easier for people.
Well, it's interesting you say that too, because like Chris Beisch, I believe it was Chris Beisch, either in our podcast or maybe he talks about it in his book, said that like any kind of like low to moderate dose of like LSD, psilocybin seems to act more on biographical material that can be more challenging to work with and integrate versus the higher dose mystical experience. You kind of go beyond that, right? You go a little bit more into the numinous, you go into these transpersonal realms where you're not working on some of this challenging biographical material that can be, you can really wrestle with it. And so I think, there is something there about going beyond it at times. And something else that comes up just in terms of personality traits. So I actually, my master's thesis was kind of thinking about this in the sense of breath work. And I was thinking, like when I was putting this project together, I was thinking about like, how could I, use this as a way to also possibly like down the line have better outcomes with psychedelic therapy. But the one thing I was really focused on was PTSD. And the thing that, Alan said here is like this difficulty to surrender with post-traumatic stress. So if you do know that, and I just think about my own experiences with surrendering, because there is something that gets triggered inside of me when I start to surrender, I guess from that experience dying. It triggers all this sort of death anxiety of like, well, this is it. I'm going home and I'm not coming back. I'm not going to wake up from this if I surrender completely into this. And there is this like weird wrestling thing that I go to, and then feeling all the stuff in the body when you start to surrender into bodily sensations, it can really activate a lot of stuff. So, the way I was thinking about the breath work, and we've chatted about this if you go in the backlog. I think the title was like Clinical Approach to Breathwork. Joe and I were chatting about it, was this idea of titration. How can we start to develop safety in the body? And can we like think about these personality traits and say, hey, maybe we do a little bit more prep work, actually. How do we develop safety in the body first? really work on nervous system regulation before going into an experience. And maybe it doesn't start off with like low or moderate doses. Maybe it just starts off with like learning how to be in the body, incorporating somatic practices, and then going in. So really developing the sense of safety without getting triggered, or at least having the skill set for navigation. If your nervous system does get triggered by all that material, at least you have some skills to navigate through that. And I think that could be like a really interesting thing to consider when thinking about these personality traits and clinical outcomes is, from that trauma perspective. Or it could be important, right? It could be re-traumatizing. I mean, I've had those experiences in the past where they were so difficult, they've left me shaken for, years. And I go, what the hell was that? And it's like the trauma still kind of lives in there at times. And then that's other shit that I have to deal with going into it. So, I think these are things to consider.
And I think you brought up something really important, it's like, trauma is experience, but for me, it's like a little bit beyond personality trait and just more about that individual's life experience. Like, what have they gone through? Like, when you say that about your near-death experience and dying, it reminded me of like, I had one seizure in my life. And when I was getting back into psychedelics, like, that's what I was like afraid of. I was like, oh shit, if I really release and really go deep, like, will I seize and like go back to that scary place and like wake up in the hospital and like all the scary, not exactly traumatizing, but really affected me stuff like around that situation. And it was really hard for me to get over at first. It was like a few years ago. And I was really staying in low and moderate dose zones because I was afraid. And I've gotten over that fear. And I will just say that it's really helped. And now when I really, really enjoy like moderately high doses, it really gets me to this beautiful place. But what I will also say is I find the mystical experiences way harder to integrate. I have no idea. Like, I'm really struggle. I realize all this really beautiful stuff and it makes me feel so great. Like, I can do anything. My anxiety is the only thing holding me back. And I'm like, shit, I'm going to write all these books. My life's going to be great. And I come back and it's really hard to integrate. I mean, I'm still doing the stuff, but I'll say that the biographical stuff that comes up on lower doses is really easy for me to like make actionable changes. Like, oh man, I got to stop drinking so much coffee. I can't be such like a bitch to everyone when I feel bad, like all this kind of stuff. I just have to like, I really see it and it really helps. And I really can they are more behavioral changes. But they've really helped my relationships and how I experience the world. And I just think there's so much to it that not that this study overlooks, and I'm glad they're looking at it, but it really, I think, comes down to the individual and learning their life experience and, what will be best for them in terms of psychedelic therapy. And I think there's so many options too. Like, we're limited by the context of the studies, like, well, this is a study for psilocybin and da-da-da-da. But in the future, if this stuff was like legal and all that kind of stuff, it might be like, I don't know, what medicine's right? What dose is right? What situation? Maybe your wife should be here, like all this kind of stuff. I think there's so many options. And I think the individual aspect of it is really what excites me personally.
Yeah, I think that's important. And it also comes back, it has me thinking about like limitations, right? If we come up with like all these protocols, like, oh, you fit into a certain type of personality trait, we think you might have this experience, we need to go through this certain protocol to make sure, like those safety measures, maybe coming back to the individual and saying, what do you need? What do you think you need? And working with that, what feels right.
But I like Alan's suggestion of maybe the trick is to start with a smaller dose and then add on like a few hours later or an hour later more. And, this is not dissimilar to, MAPS's redosing protocol, though, tryptamine is certainly quite different from MDMA. And, it's largely how I've consumed mushrooms over the past number of years is you start with however many, and then you just keep going, and dial a dose because you've got these little capsules, right? Haven't got myself in trouble yet, I don't think, but, it's certainly a lot less terrifying than dealing with it all at once and a big come up.
I'm like, whatever makes you feel comfortable. I'm one of these people who's like, no booster doses. You take it all. But that's just me. Like, I'm not giving this therapy. Like, yeah, all right, sorry. But I don't know. I think titration, just starting low and going slow is so important. And getting used to the stuff in your mind and body is like the number one thing for me before you start working with it in any other way. Like, you got to feel comfortable there.
Yeah, don't jump in the deep end right away. Like that's
you
what we
can't
always
swim,
say.
right?
If you can't swim,
Yeah.
like learn how to dip your toes in beforehand. I think that's important.
My TikTok here is more about keeping your psychedelic sessions to 3 to 5 hours as opposed to 8 to 10.
I thought you meant like wrap it up, Michelle.
Well,
You're going
we do actually have to wrap it up for
I
sure.
know.
But the last and final thing, actually, no, I don't even want to say that. I will, just because I don't want to leave anybody hanging. But the worse results for individuals who took less MDMA, I found that really interesting. So those that didn't get like the full dose, like had worse PTSD outcomes in the trials. And there's something there. I don't know what exactly, but just keep it in mind. All right, cool. Any closing thoughts, you two?
No, I don't think so. It's fun as usual.
Yeah, this was
Super
a good
fun.
one.
Yeah, going off script is maybe our specialty now. We have all these links.
Something we typically do.
Yeah, right. Off the rails. It's my lifestyle. All right. So thanks, everybody. This video will be up on YouTube in a couple days too. So check it out if you want to watch us talk instead of just listening to us talk. And anything we want to point to. Oh, yeah, the book giveaway again. Check that out. It's in the show notes. It'll be on our socials and probably on our welcome page. You can get to like right from Instagram. What is it? psychedelictoday.com/welcome maybe. And then May 20, we kick off our next round of navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. So if you want to learn more about that, psychedelic-education-center.com, and let's see where we go. Yeah. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Kyle and Michelle. This is super fun.
You.
Can't wait to do it again. And thank you, everybody. And we'll see you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Thanks.